My grandparents decided to take the whole family on a cruise at Christmas time around the Caribbean. There were 14 of us, so we were all located in different cabins spread over different floors. My sister and myself, I'm female, shared a room. I was 16 and my sister was 14. On our first night, we could barely sleep as the couple in the adjoining cabin were having a very loud argument. The man kept calling the girl a whore and shouted that she was only there because of his money. It went on until the early hours of the morning. After that night, all was quiet, and I assumed the girl had moved to another cabin as I'd never seen or heard from her again. The next day, we were up early for breakfast. I was keen to explore the ship, and my sister was taking a while to get ready. I thought that if I waited in the corridor, that I would encourage her to hurry up. While I was waiting in the corridor, I heard the next door opening, and I couldn't help but look to see who the man was that had been doing all of that shouting. He looked at me, and his eyes lit up straight away. This horrible feeling came over me. This feeling I now know is gut instinct. I just knew from the way that he looked at me that he was bad news. He looked to be in his 40s and looked normal, but I couldn't stop the shivers from traveling up my spine. He said hello, but all I could manage was a faint smile. I decided I'd head back into the room. As I was chapping on the door, the man was walking down the corridor to the elevators, but repeatedly looked back to look at me. From that point on, he seemed to be everywhere. In the dining room at lunch, he would sit close by. At the pool, he would be only a few loungers along. A couple of times I got in elevators, only to have him run in behind me, even though I hadn't seen him around before I'd entered the lift. Luckily, though I wasn't with my family, there had always been other people in the lift when he ran in. All he did was stand and stare at me, and I would get shivers down my back. The first couple of days I tried to ignore it. I had always gotten attention from boys. I tried to just brush it off as a bit of attention, but something didn't seem right. Especially since the ship we were on was massive, and there were so many people on board, I started to find it hard to believe that he would just randomly bump into me. We had told my mom and dad, and the others about the argument in the other room from the first night, but I couldn't bring myself to say anything about the man following me. I felt embarrassed. Silly, I know. Near the end of the week, I wanted to leave the pool and get changed to go watch a movie with my cousins. My sister wanted to stay at the pool, so I headed to the room by myself. When I got into the elevator with another few people, I noticed the man sneak in at the end, and all I could feel was dread as he stared at me. The other people on the lift got off at our stop, but went in another direction. As I walked down the corridor to my room, I could feel the man's eyes on the back of my neck. I quickly sped up and hurried to my room. A minute passed and there was a knock at my door. Immediately, I knew it was him. There had been no one else in the corridor. The knocks continued as I panicked on what I should do. I thought I would have to answer the door because he had watched me enter and knew I was there. I answered the door, and the man had the creepiest smile on his face.
"Hey, sweet thing. I'm locked out of my room. Can I come in and use your phone?"
I knew he was lying, so I quickly thought of something to get out of the situation. "Sorry, our phone isn't working," I said as I tried to shut the door.
"Oh, fuck. You're Scottish?"
he asked in a surprised voice. I mumbled something in agreement, shutting the door, but he stuck his foot in. I decided to use all of my strength and batter the door against his foot. He cried out in pain, but put his other foot in place.
"Hey, I just need to come in for a minute,"
he kept shouting at me. I told him he could just go to reception and continued to try to shut the door, and the panic was flooding through me. The next minute I heard someone say, "Jess, what's going on?" With relief, I realized it was my older male cousin, Jonathan, coming by so we could watch the film. "Hey, who are you?" Jonathan shouted at the man.
"Oh, sorry, I didn't realize you were Scottish. I thought I knew your friend from back in the US,
the guy mumbled.
It's just a little misunderstanding."
He hopped away and proceeded to enter his room. We left the next morning and I didn't see him again. But I'll never forget that creepy expression he had on his face every time he looked at me. It makes me sick to my stomach. When I was about 15, I went on a cruise with my parents around Asia. One night, I was making my way back to the kids' club. My mom insisted that I join so I could meet new people, after changing into my swimsuit at my cabin. It was around midnight, and since 90% of the people on the ship were elderly, they were already in bed, so everywhere I went was empty. My cabin was on the lowest level of the ship, whereas the pool was on the top deck, so I had a fair way to go to get there. After waiting for one of the 6 elevators to open up for 5 minutes, I got impatient and ran for the stairs. That was when I heard,
"Are you running away from me?"
I turned around, and a man who looked to be in his late 20s was dressed from head to toe in gray and grinning at me. Unsure of how to act, I gave him a slight smile and tried to keep walking, but he moved fast and blocked my path. He asked me all of these questions like,
"What's your name? How old are you? And where are you from? Why are you so uncomfortable around me?"
But I managed to lie and say my parents were waiting for me, and before he answered, I walked away, then ran when I couldn't see him anymore. At about 1:30 to 2, I said goodbye to my new friends and started to head towards the stairs again. And guess who I ran into? The man was coming up the stairs when I was about to go down, and as soon as he spotted me, he grinned. He was purposefully blocking my way, and his questions were getting more and more personal. He kept telling me I had a pretty smile and that I was beautiful, and he offered to walk me to my cabin. At this point, my gut was telling me to get away fast. That was the second time I ran into him, and it was on the same floor. I began to think that his cabin was on that floor, and was worrying what he would do. Every time he said something, I replied with, "I have to go," and eventually I could see he was getting angry. And this went on for several minutes. More questions, more compliments, even some touching. And he hit the wall beside us once when I wasn't giving him the answers he wanted, but then he took a deep breath and smiled at me. I was beginning to get really scared, so I turned around, ran through the glass doors behind me to the pool deck, and collided with one of the boys from the club. I began to panic, convinced the man was coming after me. I was talking too fast and hyperventilating, and my friend had no idea what was going on. I turned around to point to the man, but he wasn't there anymore. I told my parents what happened, which led to my dad walking me to the club every night. My mom was determined to find out who he was, so she and I went to the little photo shop on one of the decks and looked through the mandatory photos that each passenger had taken before they got on the ship. He wasn't in a single photo. I never saw him again after that. It was as if he wasn't even on the boat. I still wonder what could have happened if I hadn't run away and found my friend. Sometimes I wonder whether or not he was even real. Besides, no one but me ever saw him. When I was around 10 years old, my family took a trip to Egypt. It was a sort of half-cruise down the Nile. We would stay often in various spots to check things out, and I don't think we honestly actually traveled on the boat very far. It's where our rooms were, though. My memory is a bit shaky on the finer parts, as it was almost 20 years ago, but I do remember lots of the cool things we went to see and do. The Great Pyramids, riding a camel, museums, mummies, and that sort of thing. but I also remember a lot of not-so-fun things. Like the tour guide telling my family that my mother and I could never be by ourselves without either our male family members or others from the tour group. They told us that men in the country would see a single woman as someone seeking sex, as they wouldn't travel alone otherwise. Or the man offering my father a herd of camels for me, and a bit less for my mother as she was older. On top of the ship we were staying at, there was a swimming pool. One morning, as I was using it, sporting a one-piece bathing suit, there was a boat driving past where we were moored, full of men. They were hooting and hollering, applauding and making a general ruckus as they could see me, and I put on theatrics because of it, diving into the pool, strutting around and loving the attention. I cringe at this now. Years later, my mother would tell me how in a store selling souvenirs on the shore, she was groped by the seller. He was placing a necklace on her and gave one of her breasts a really invasive feel. She told my father and he shrugged it off at the time, and she was still mad at him over it. To this day, I remember the one morning my parents went to go watch the sunrise over the desert. It required a very early wake-up, and my brother and I declined to go. So while my parents were out in the desert looking at the sun, my brother was still sleeping. I decided to go to the pool. This may be the same day that I was catcalled since I was at the pool area by myself, but I'm not 100% sure I remember. I do remember though that on the top of the ship, there was a hatch going down one level near the pool. That day I eyed it and decided I had to know where it went. It was easy to open, and I climbed down a short ladder to the deck below. This deck was still open to the outside, with doors leading to compartments and such. The way the boat was moored, we were a couple of ships out from the port. And to get off the boat, you'd have to traverse the other ships in between, but I think this was a normal thing. They were all lined up together, and the travelers would simply disembark by going through the various ships until reaching shore. I went right when I reached the bottom, noticing the major differences from the other areas of the boat I had been on. The area was dirtier, and there were ropes and other types of junk lying around. I found where the kitchens were, and stood a while looking through the window. I remember it seemingly rather gross looking in there, which redoubled my desire to never eat there. My family had already decided not to eat on the boat when a waiter visibly sweated into the soups he served us. I went back towards where the ladder was, then continued a bit to the left. From this vantage point, I could see all the ships between ours and the shore. I think there was around 3 or 4 total. I noticed on the far ship that a man was hopping over the railings and coming towards me, one boat at a time. This is versus coming through the main area, which had been set up for the tourists to easily get through all of the ships to get to shore. I backed up a bit, back towards the ladder, as I realized he was making a beeline towards me. He came over the railing, and I don't remember what exactly he said to me, but it was an introduction in heavily accented English. He asked me if I wanted to party. I was a little confused. In my head, party is when my parents had friends over and lots of music and dancing. I liked parties because sometimes I got to stay up late and dance too. I don't remember exactly how he convinced me, but I remember standing in the open doorway to the cabin where he was inviting me in. It smelled like smoke, and there was a haze all throughout the room. 3 men in the traditional garb, I don't know what it's called, the long flowing dress shirts they like to wear with the headgear as well, sitting and smiling at me, waving their hands, a hookah nearby them, bottles everywhere. Outside the room the sun was shining and everything was bright and lit up. In there was an underlying smell I couldn't place, smoke drifting, and the blinds were all shut, giving the room a reddish tinge. Out of everything, that memory is the most vivid. I remember looking up at the smiling mustached man standing in the doorway. He wasn't intimidating, a bit scrawny. He had a good smile that didn't seem off. My little prepubescent brain did light up though. It went, I'm pretty sure this is not one of those situations I'm supposed to be in, and I really need to go right now. So I booked it. I turned tail and skedaddled to the ladder. I didn't look back a single time, just got up the ladder as fast as I could and ran back to our room. My brother was in where he was still sleeping. I told my parents after they returned. They filed a complaint, but nothing ever came of it. The room in question was a crew member's lounge or something, and I never saw any of those guys again. My parents left Egypt disgruntled, and I never really thought about it again until a few years later when I was older. Would I be dead by now? Sold into a sex ring? Married to some Egyptian guy with a bunch of kids by now? It makes me shudder to even think about it. And I'm very grateful that my school did cover a little about stranger danger. It was enough to make me reject that very friendly guy and realize this was a bad situation for me to be in. With all the weird situations that happened on that trip and the fascination I apparently held for being so young, I can't help but think that something terrible would have happened if I had gone into that room. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here, as always. I just wanted to thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you guys did enjoy the video, please feel free to leave feedback in the comments below, or perhaps like, share, or subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have a story you'd like to share, or you'd just like to chat sometime, go ahead and take a look in the description below. There will be links to all of my social media, including my Facebook, Twitter, and Gmail accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to include your story in a video or respond to your message as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is, what the theme is if it has any, and how you'd like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in. If you're curious at all about the music used in this video, that is always listed in the description below, by name in the order which it appears in the video, and I'll also have links to the artists as well if you'd like to check out more of their work. So if you're curious about the music, go ahead and check down there in the description. Last but not least, if you guys have any constructive criticism, please be sure to let me know in the comments below, as I'm always looking for new ways to improve the channel. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day.